Awesome. As the food comes in, we're going to go ahead and get started. As a reminder, we are recording the session, so please don't say anything you regret, because we're not going to edit any of the videos or anything. It's going to be public. So welcome to the Boston Office 365 user group. We've been a user group for 2.5 years, almost 3 years, come April, May. We've been active every month. We meet the third Thursday of every month. I know there's a lot of new faces here. Thank you for coming out. Follow us Twitter, on the web, or we have a meetup, LinkedIn. Get connected. It's a pretty good community. Ask questions, post stuff, share what's going on, and we will. If you're tagging us, we'll do our best to hook you up with the right person, or one of us might be the right person.
You edit your slide on the web, put an R in group.
Uh-oh. In group? What?
User group.
Oh.
We have a user group.
User group.
We do not own that URL.
Not yet. I'm going to buy that tonight. That's why we haven't seen the traffic. People are going to the wrong site. That explains it. So I am David Losey. I work for Islam Consulting. I'm a solution architect over there focused on collaboration with Office 365, SharePoint, and other tools. Mike Dixon, the gentleman in the Santa hat, he is a senior consultant with Wellington Street Consulting, also very focused on Office 365. And Dimitri, who just stepped out to get our pizza, is with Cognizant, and he's a SharePoint competency lead for Cognizant. What's that? Yeah, he's our gopher tonight. Last week we met at District Hall in the Seaport area. Really nice venue, really nice place. Really weird session. I think Arthur and one other person showed up, and we're being recorded, so I want to say anything else about that right now, but we'll talk about it later. Huge thanks to Datto for sponsoring that event as well. So one thing we like to do is, since we last met, we'll go over some of the updates Microsoft has released for Office 365. Sometimes there's a lot of these, sometimes there's few, but it's just everything that Microsoft's published. Nothing through the rumor mill, nothing from other websites. We're getting it directly from Microsoft sites. And we're kind of curating the best ones we think you might be interested in. So Microsoft announced that there's more availability availability across the globe in 10 new markets. I'm not going to read them all off, but there they are, the dark red areas. So if you're in a larger enterprise and with an international presence, you may now have new availability in your regions. So that's always a spot of good news. Co-authoring has been stepped up in PowerPoint now. They have the ability to really see what people are editing, so very similar to the co-authoring in the web interface that's been there with Word, where you can see who's typing where. That is now available in PowerPoint 2016. So on-premises or the local client install, using Office 365 as where the file share is, you can now real-time collaborate on these PowerPoint decks, which is really nice. I'm looking forward to using that one. Outlook, you can now move attachments to the cloud and share with others. So they've always had this ability when you upload it to upload it into the cloud, into your OneDrive. But now also when you receive emails with attachments, you can say, save this to my OneDrive or save it to one of my groups, which is really cool. So I can receive an email with an attachment. I just did this week, found it by accident, and then I read this. And I wanted to put the attachment into my Teams site, the Skype, the naming conventions here are terrible. The Teams group that I was using, so through Outlook I was able to say send to this group, and it's uploaded the file to the correct SharePoint library in the back end, and then my team was able to access the file. Really slick, really smooth, nice new collaboration feature, so we're not forwarding emails and having gazillion versions of a file, or download the file first and re-upload it manually, and then you forget where you uploaded it.
Do you know if there's going to be availability for SharePoint libraries
as
well?
I don't know. I don't know. I know OneDrive and Office 365 groups. I don't know about general libraries. Could probably just look to see if it's there. How many of you guys use Visio? How many of you use it with data? Like Okay, awesome. I use it a lot, but more for just diagramming without real live data. But Visio is coming to the web in iOS. It's in preview right now, so your users can consume Visio files on the web, and they have an iOS app. They haven't shared when it's going to be available for GA, but it is available now, and I believe these links here will get you to those previews. So it allows you to interact with it. You can interact with the data, zoom in, zoom out, all that stuff. It's not just a static like a PDF. It's not that static. It's a lot more rich. So this one I found really interesting. The ability to have Cortana schedule things for you. So it's using natural language processing or conversational computing, I guess is what it's called now. And on the left-hand side is an example of an email. You can say, Cortana can help us find time next week to chat over Skype. And if you CC the Cortana account, it's going to then work with that person and find the right time. So Cortana is going to email saying, I'm trying to set up a time. They're going to come back, well, this time works. And then Cortana is going to reply. And then once it's solved, then it gets added to your calendar. Really cool. Kind of scary, but really cool.
So is this maybe the next evolution of the Find Time app?
Yeah, just on steroids. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So that's it for updates. It's been a kind of quiet month from Microsoft. Has anybody heard anything else new from Microsoft or recently just experienced like, whoa, that's in there now?
Teams.
Yes.
Teams is kind of huge.
Yeah. That got released last month, I think, or 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So we covered it last month.
Did we?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you weren't here. Sorry. Yeah.
More people are here.
Yeah, Teams was a big update. How many of you are using Teams? Tried it out, yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, it's promising. It definitely has a lot to learn and to grow. It's definitely promising. I think I don't think Microsoft built it as a Slack competitor, but it's definitely a Slack competitor. And I think right now, the way it stands, it's probably better than Slack.
Why is it a Yammer competitor?
But then, what's Yammer? But they. Because it's Microsoft, they're adding a ton of features to it, and not all the features work right just yet. Like I just experienced in integrating Planner with it. 2 clicks, you have a new Planner list on a team, but it doesn't fully integrate with the Planner website, so you can't see the tasks on the straight Planner site. You can only see them through the team site. And as a project manager, you can't see all tasks outside of Teams, so you still have to use Teams for some of that. And so Microsoft's heading in this right direction there for sure.
It is in preview.
It is in preview, yeah. So they could turn it off tomorrow, and then we're all out of luck. So, anybody else? New things they've experienced? Yes.
No, I'm trying to find out if anybody heard about the SharePoint Sync client. It's supposed to let you have access to larger libraries of 5,000 files.
I don't know.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that tonight.
Yeah.
Oh,
Excellent.
Yeah, it's actually the OneDrive is what uses the SharePoint Sync client. And something significant seemed to happen with patches or something this past month, because I got flooded with calls from lots of different clients of mine saying that all of a sudden their OneDrive synchronization wasn't working.
Nice.
So,
Nice.
and I actually experienced some of that myself.
Right.
Yeah, prompting all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So I think a patch was released in the past month or so that for OneDrive that maybe went a little loopy.
Right. I was on a call with a client sharing my screen with a file that was on OneDrive. Then I got a little alert saying, OneDrive's no longer syncing. Click here to resync.
Yeah.
And I clicked it and it wanted to resync everything, which I panicked because I didn't want to have to re-download. I have like 100 gigs in my OneDrive.
Yeah.
So a reboot fixed it, actually. Rebooting cleared that error message, and OneDrive's been working smooth since then. So something funky for sure.
Yeah.
So let's pause here for a minute. The food's
Yes,
there.
perfect.
Get it while it's hot. We'll pick it up again.
And then we're ready for our speaker after the pizza.
Good. Excellent.
We are going to get started. Hello, thanks for coming out tonight. Excited to see so many people. My name's Oliver Bartholdson. You already have been staring at the topic for today, which is OneDrive for Business. I'm a SharePoint guy, SharePoint consultant. I work for a company down in DC called New Signature. But being a SharePoint guy, these days you really take on a lot of other products and technologies with Office 365. So I'm also, at least for my company, I'm also the OneDrive guy, the Delve guy, anything else that sits on top of SharePoint. So yeah, also Microsoft, PTSP, usually work out of the Cambridge office here and there. Feel free to follow me, connect with me on LinkedIn, and keep the conversation going. So anything that we talk about today, I'm going to put the slide presentation up on the site after. I have references pretty much to anything we talk about. So if there's something in particular that you want to read more about, want to learn how to configure, the very last slide, I have links to all the TechNet and MSDN stuff. So you'll have access to all that later on. All right. All right, so our topic tonight is OneDrive for Business, Administration, Security, and Compliance. How many of you are using OneDrive for Business today? All right, I'm a little over half. How many of you have actually deployed it, been part of the deployment? Like either you did it for a customer or you did it for your own company? Okay, yeah, cool. So with OneDrive, just like really any other technology within Office 365, really to do it the right way, it takes quite a bit of planning. I've worked with some customers that really just flip the switch onto OneDrive for Business because it is easy to use. It's easy for end users to start just getting in there and uploading their data. But inevitably, having employee data out in Office 365, there's things to consider. And when I started working with Office 365, which was actually called BPOS at the time, this product really didn't exist in the same way. It was part of another SharePoint kind of predecessor. And Microsoft has really invested a lot into making OneDrive for Business really a differentiator in cloud storage compared to all other products like Dropbox, Box. And one of the main reasons it's a differentiator is because of what we're going to talk about tonight, which is that security and compliance features you don't get with other products. So some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, like just as an example, if you turn on OneDrive for Business and you have your employees start uploading their data, if let's say an employee leaves the organization, right? What happens to that data now? Because you don't have a license for them anymore, right? So the license goes away because you're not going to pay for them to, keep a license at 365. What happens to that data? Or if you have larger customers, if your company's a large company, what if you get into some litigation? Like maybe you need to get into either e-discovery or you need to put data on hold. Do you know how to do that if need be within 365? Another thought might be data retention. Like maybe your company has requirements for compliance that you have to keep data for a certain amount of time. Do you know how that works in OneDrive, if at all? What does that look like? How do we enable that? And these are all the questions that customers typically ask me when I'm doing a deployment like this. So these are all the things that we're going to talk through. Yes.
Ask just a background question.
Yes.
OneDrive, as I understand it, is based on an individual storage.
Correct.
And when do you use OneDrive and when do you use SharePoint if you want information available to the whole organization?
That's a very big question. So the question was, when do you use OneDrive versus when do you use SharePoint if you're trying to share documents or share information through the company? And there's also a question about the storage. How does the storage work? Even as a consultant, like selling this product and selling the services, it's difficult to recommend one product within the Office 365 suite for every single use case because every company works a little differently. So there might be a scenario where your department or your team wants to start sharing information, and it's a very clear fit for SharePoint. But there are other organizations where it's more natural to start a document in your own OneDrive. Like maybe I'm going to start it here. Once it gets to a certain point, then I'm going to copy it or move it into a SharePoint site. So there's not one answer to when do we use which product. It's a question that a lot of companies are struggling to figure out now that you have groups, you have teams, you have SharePoint team sites, you have OneDrive. There's a lot of places to put things. I think that the only clear answer I'll give you is the way Microsoft views OneDrive. It's a personal document storage. It's made for your own files. It's not made to replace a file server. It's not. You don't dump it in here. You don't. Take a whole bunch of shared folders and move them into OneDrive. It's made for you to store your own personal files. And SharePoint's more of that collaborative, team-oriented space for documents like that. And the storage is very different. We're going to talk about this in a minute, but with OneDrive, everybody gets unlimited storage. All users get as much storage as they want. With SharePoint, there's actually a pool of storage that you pull from based on how many users you have and how, if you want to pay to buy the storage. But there is no paying for storage in OneDrive. If you license a user 365, they have unlimited personal storage.
And you can invite someone to see files in your OneDrive or not?
You can, yep. We'll cover that too. So you have the capability to share both internally and externally with partners. Mm-hmm. Is there another question too in the back? Or no? Okay. All right, so what we're going to cover tonight is this journey of going from really the planning stages before you launch OneDrive, and then what happens after you launch. So there's a bunch of things that you need to consider prior to flipping the switch and turning on OneDrive. And there's a few things after it's live that you should, or you could use. Some customers don't use all these pieces. Maybe there's only a couple that you hear that are interesting to you, and maybe you're like, oh, my company could use that. You don't have to do all of this, but this is just a pretty good set of the capabilities that are available to you. There's even some that I didn't include just because we don't have time, that if you have a specific question that we don't talk about, hit me up after, or we'll talk about it, because there's even more capabilities. So I try to fit what are like the top 10 things that we can talk about that most people will have licenses for. But if there's something specific, we can certainly dive into that too. Down at the bottom, you'll see those two gray words there. We're not going to talk about governance planning or data migration tonight. But the reason why I include this slide is just to tell you that these are really important topics that you do need to plan for and think about. And somebody talk about governance. What is governance when I say that? Somebody familiar with it? What does that mean? Anyone? Take a stab at it?
No idea.
It's a plan for when to use different storage mediums and how to use the technologies that are being rolled out. Mm-hmm. It's basically the document that you would create to answer Arthur's question.
Yeah, so when to use a certain part of the technology is part of it. I also think the roles of who can do what within this technology, the responsibilities of that role as to what, let's say we have an administrator. Can the administrator see the employee's data? Can the administrator move the employee's data? Can the administrator license the user to give them OneDrive? Can the manager of the employee have access to the data, or do they have to request it from the administrator? So thinking through those roles and how they all fit together is going to be important, because if you just turn this on, suddenly you have people dumping data into the cloud, into Office 365, and some of the default settings within OneDrive would make it difficult to get at that data if you didn't think through these steps. So governance planning is a key consideration. You should definitely go through and think about what are the answers to those questions for your company. And then data migration, this is not a necessary component in order to use OneDrive. Some companies just allow users to self-migrate their data. Like, we're going to give you this tool. If you want to use it, great, start dumping data in there. The larger companies that I've worked with, they are really interested in making a seamless transition from like a My Documents on a file server into OneDrive. So they don't want to have people dragging and dropping 10 gigs of data and waiting, tying up their computer, waiting around to migrate. They just want to, how can we make this as seamless as possible? The user logs in, they see all their data in the cloud, they have it locally. That's when you have to think about data migration. So we're not going to really talk about all that goes into that. I will recommend a tool in the middle of this, but that's definitely another thing that requires its own set of planning.
That's a quick question.
Yes.
On the governance plan, from your history, as you reflect back on your projects, not a good governance plan most likely equals not a good one.
I think it comes to bite you after the deployment happens. So you can have a successful deployment, but you won't have successful maintenance or administration. As soon as something goes wrong, like a help desk ticket comes in and someone says, I try to share a document with so-and-so and it's not working. And the support desk goes in and then they say, I can't see the documents, so I don't know what to do. Well, that's by design, and so it's thinking through how are we going to maintain and support this. So I think it's possible to have a good deployment, but it's not possible long-term to sustain it without having the governance plan.
And the governance plan would be good to include that back to automating workflow, everything else. The governance plan is sort of like a common role on everything that goes over. That's it.
So I think what you're speaking of is more of a SharePoint governance plan. So OneDrive is built on top of SharePoint, but a lot of the components you just mentioned, like taxonomy, workflow, those don't really find a home in OneDrive. So OneDrive technically is it's built, the foundation of it is SharePoint on the back end, but it doesn't have a lot of the same controlled kind of features and trying to say like organizational taxonomy. You wouldn't introduce that into OneDrive. It's meant to be kind of free flowing. Some people want to use folders. Some people want to have everything just loosely in their OneDrive. It's your own space to do what you want. So I think with OneDrive, it's more around roles and responsibilities and when to use which technology more than kind of the other SharePoint components that would make up a typical governance plan for SharePoint. Okay, so for those of you who aren't using OneDrive for Business yet, there's a few of you. Just the 1-minute overview. I've already touched on the fact that it provides unlimited storage. So every user that gets a license gets unlimited storage for personal data. It includes a sync client, which means you have your data living in Microsoft Cloud and Office 365, but there's a local synchronization tool that brings those files locally. So I have access to all my documents, whether I'm connected to the internet or not. And it's a faster way. It's a way of accessing documents people are used to. Like they click Windows Explorer, boom, there's your documents, as opposed to going to the browser and navigating to those files. So because it's Office 365, it does provide anywhere access, meaning you can log on from anywhere, access your data. If you wanted to use a web-based client, it does, just the OneDrive for Business license does include Office web apps, so PowerPoint, Word, Excel. You can go directly into the browser and edit the documents. It does have rich co-authoring, so you can see what people are doing in the files. It gives you the capability to share internally and externally. And then that last blue box on the right is really what we're talking about tonight. So we're not really talking about the end user features or like all the great capabilities of OneDrive. We're really talking about what I think differentiates OneDrive from other products out there, which is the administration and security controls you have within 365. So we're going to jump right in with the very first one. And this is the secondary administrator. So if you notice here, something doesn't look right. So a global administrator in 365 is really the highest level of permission. If you were to log in as a global administrator into my OneDrive in my company, you would see the picture on the left. You would see nothing, because by default, the administrators don't have access to the data that lives in OneDrive. When the OneDrive gets originally provisioned, only the end user is the administrator. So maybe that works for your company, maybe not. Depends on your policies. But if somebody on the help desk or someone in compliance or and someone in IT needs access, you need to figure this out and think about how are we going to get access to the user data so that they're not the only ones that see what's in their OneDrive. So the way to do that, there's really two different options. So the order of these things as we're talking, it is kind of important because this particular configuration step of adding a secondary administrator, it's a lot easier if you do it before the OneDrive is provisioned. So when the OneDrive gets provisioned when the user logs in for the first time, you give them a license, they log in, and then it spins up the OneDrive. If you have already configured this setting, it's automatically going to add a secondary administrator for you. So, it shows the end user's name, and then it shows whatever admin account that you add right there. It's easy. If you don't do this ahead of time, so for those of you who have already turned on OneDrive and maybe you haven't thought about this yet, it's a little more complicated because now you have, let's say you have 100 OneDrive sites out there and you don't have a secondary administrator. You could go one by one and manually add it, but for large organizations, it's PowerShell. So there's a couple of PowerShell scripts that you'd have to run, one of them being, give me a list of all the OneDrive sites that are out there, and then the second one being apply that secondary administrator account to each of the existing OneDrives. So Microsoft does give us scripts that are very easy to use, but obviously doing this beforehand is a lot easier. If you define, hey, here's the account or here's the security group we want to give access to the OneDrive, You drop it, and I didn't mention, but it's in the SharePoint Admin Center. So I'll show you that in a few minutes, but it's pretty straightforward. There's a spot where you can just drop a name in. Yes?
Is there anything to the end user that telling them that there's a second admin added and someone's looking at your data?
So one of my tips is actually to communicate that. And here's the reason why.
So the answer is no.
The answer is no. There's no notification, but I do think it's good to communicate it because the end user is the administrator, just like your own help desk account would be the administrator, which means the end user can remove the other administrator, right? They're equal. It's a site collection administrator is the highest level you go within that site collection. So end user sees a random account they don't recognize, they could just delete it, which obviously that's not good. So now, again, you're back to only that user has access to the data. So just by way of policy, it's good to communicate, hey, you're going to see this compliance account in there, however you want to communicate it. But as you'll see a little later in the session, there's ways to then get notified when people do those things. Like alert me when someone deletes this site collection administrator account, send me an email, send it to whatever team. So there's that. Just a couple other tips. If you have a really big organization, you don't want to try and set the secondary administrator for thousands and thousands of accounts in the same day. It takes a while to iterate through. So Microsoft's recommendation is no more than 2,500 a day. So just create batches of, I don't know if anybody has that big of an organization, but it's just good to do it in batches. One other piece, I said I wasn't going to talk about data migration much tonight. I will point out there's that logo on the right called product called ShareGate. That product is a fantastic product. I don't work for them, but I use them on every single migration or governance project that I do because it gives us not only the ability to migrate and maintain the data and all that, it has a whole suite of governance tools that allow us to do things like add an administrator to every OneDrive, see all the data in the OneDrive, look at the settings that users are using. So instead of running a bunch of PowerShell, it's just one click. Like, show me OneDrive, there it is. Set an administrator on all OneDrives, there it goes. So it's well worth the investment, not only to just deploy OneDrive and do the data migration, but as an ongoing tool to support it. I definitely recommend it. Yes?
If I could also just add, one of my recommendations to all of my clients for how to use that secondary administrator is to point it to an administrative group that is solely dedicated to that purpose and to not have anybody in there unless it's needed.
Yep.
So that's one of the ways that we dealt with kind of governance and policy around that. So nobody has regular access to it, but we can get it if we need it by adding ourselves into that group.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I've had some customers do that too, like a break glass account where they have to, request it for an hour, they can go and deal with the help desk ticket and then they lose access, get access revoked. Great. All right, we can move on to the next topic, which is storage. So I mentioned that you get unlimited storage for every user. Microsoft doesn't just give you unlimited storage though. The way it works is they set up everybody with a terabyte of data initially. So if I log in right now and look at my sync client, it's going to show my available storage is 1 terabyte. So what I'm going to show you is there's a way to increase it or decrease it. So right now the default is a terabyte. You may want to specify the storage quota for your company. Maybe you don't want to support a terabyte of data for some reason. I've had some customers have said, I want to only have, like 50 gigs or 100 gigs because they're worried about like syncing too much data to the hard drive and whatever. Great, you can specify how big you want the storage to be, and you can also extend it beyond a terabyte. So with the same PowerShell command line to say we want to give them less, you can also give them more, anywhere up to 5 terabytes. At 5 terabytes, Microsoft cuts you off and you have to go to them and ask for more. I've never actually had a customer ask for more, but according to their documentation, they'll give it to you if you ask for it. So that process it's all PowerShell. So you just specify what do you want the new quota to be. So that's the first commandlet for the whole tenant. So for our whole tenant, for all of our employees, we're going to say maybe we want to give everybody the full 5 terabytes right out of the gate. Just why not, right? So that would be the first piece. And then if somebody already provisioned a OneDrive, you could then specify that you have to specify each site URL. So every user that has a OneDrive, you'd have to then say that user's OneDrive, reset it back to whatever your quota is. So if it's now going to 5 terabytes, you'd reset it, it would go to 5. And then you may have some users you want to be at different levels. You can also do that. You could say this user group over here, they're more like a kiosk user. We don't, or deskless worker or whatever. We don't need to have them have a whole bunch of data in OneDrive. Just give them 10 gigs. Give executives 5 terabytes. You can also specify by the user the URL of that user site. Okay, so for the first two, adding that secondary admin and specifying the storage quota, those are both good things to do before you provision the OneDrives. Simply because if you set it ahead of time, you don't have to go retroactively and try to fix settings that may be different depending upon whether that you provisioned it or not. So I mentioned that when a user logs in, it spins up the OneDrive site. This is actually part of the process that's been been built into SharePoint for some time. With SharePoint, it used to be called the My Site. So if you're familiar with that, I don't know, some of you may have heard that before. But with the My Site, the user would log in, and the My Site site collection, which is what it's called in SharePoint, doesn't exist until the user first tries to access it. They click on the SkyDrive or My Site or whatever link. At that point, the site collection spins up, and it takes, it could take some time, a couple minutes in some instances. That's when that container actually gets created. Now, if you're just going to turn on OneDrive and let people self-migrate, meaning I'm just going to let my employees move their data at will, this pre-provisioning stuff doesn't really matter because they go in, they click OneDrive. Now with 365, it only takes probably 30 seconds to spin up that site collection, and then they can start moving their data in. However, if you're thinking about more of that seamless approach where you want to take the data from your file server or some other storage area and move it into OneDrive, you would have to what's called pre-provision all of those OneDrives. Otherwise, there's nowhere to move the data into, right? Until they log in, it doesn't exist. So this piece is just around, setting up the OneDrives first so that then you can take the data and move it into OneDrive on behalf of that user. So the way this is done, this is, again, done with PowerShell. And when you run this PowerShell commandlet, it puts it into a queue. So there's a timer job, there's a queue. So even if you run this, it doesn't instantly set it up. It just puts it in line to get set up, and then it will spin it. You can only do 200 at a time. So for a big organization, unfortunately, there's no way around that. You just have to create a lot of smaller batches. One little tip on running this is just that when you in order to run any PowerShell for SharePoint Online, you have to be a global administrator. And one thing that I've learned is that global administrator account has to be licensed. So if you have customers that you're maybe doing this work for on their behalf, they can give you a global admin account without assigning a license to it. You're going to run into problems with this. So license your global admin account when you do this. Okay.
Which particular command do you find required to run into that?
Just this piece, request SPO's personal site. I haven't either, but okay. This commandlet. So, yeah. This is a newer commandlet too. There used to be another process that it doesn't matter. This one just recently came out though, okay. And I find it's better than the old way we had to do it. Okay, so the question of retention. User, employee quits, gets terminated. What happens to that data? By default, that data goes away after 30 days. So the user quits, the clock starts ticking, 30 days later, wiped out. There's ways to change that process, but that's what happens by default. So when we talk about this retention period, it's only when an account gets deleted. So if you delete an account from Active Directory that's being synchronized, if you delete it locally and then whenever it syncs and realizes it's not there anymore, or if you go into the admin center in 365. So it's only if it gets deleted. When the account gets deleted, there's a process called the My Site cleanup job. PowerPoint stopped working. That's not a good sign. No, we're good. So the cleanup job is that retention. Oh, there it goes. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, you might yourself.
Here we go. Where was I?
What are you gonna do, fire me? Just mic this up.
It's a back? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't mention how it works. So with this cleanup job, the way that it works when the account gets deleted, it actually checks for the manager field in Active Directory. So if you have a clean Active Directory structure and you have a manager in that manager field, the manager gets an email saying so-and-so's account's been deleted. You now have 30 days to do something with the data. And at that point, the manager gets access to the data to then do something with it, move it somewhere, download it locally, whatever they need to do. If your Active Directory is not clean, maybe you don't have a manager in that manager field, or maybe you don't want them to be the ones managing it, then you have the option to add somebody else's account. So this is called My Site Cleanup, I think delegated access delegation. So you could specify another account, just like we had a secondary administrator. There may be somebody else that's responsible for taking the data out of OneDrive when a user is terminated and putting it somewhere. So that's part of, we talked about the governance plan. That's another recommendation that you already think through this, so that a week later somebody quits, they have 10 gigs of data. Whose job is it to figure out if that data is good? Where does it go? How long is it kept for? Those are questions, again, to think through. But at least by doing this, you have somebody that can manage the process. Say, okay, I now have access to their OneDrive. Automatically, it's going to grant me access, and then I can maybe use a migration tool like ShareGate, migrate the data to somewhere else, somebody else's OneDrive, export it, whatever you need to do. And the other cool thing that just came out is the ability to change that retention period. So the retention period right now, that 30-day timer job, you can change that number to anywhere up to 3,650 days, so 10 years. So if you just wanted to not deal with this problem and just keep everything for 10 years, then
It's already not gonna be there anyway in 10 years. So.
True.
Make it the next guy's problem.
Exactly. So yeah, and that's across the board. So there's a tenant level PowerShell commandlet that I have there. You set it to however long you want, and it just keeps the data in for that amount of time.
Who pays for that?
No one.
Microsoft does.
Yeah, we don't.
Welcome.
So you can unlicense that user, right? So they quit, you take their license away and give it to a new employee. Their OneDrive data lives on until this timer job says, oh, it's been 10 years, delete it, or whatever amount of time you want to specify. Yeah.
So they just stay in the recycle bin or something?
It actually doesn't even get put to the recycle bin. It just stays as an active site collection.
It would be shown as a disconnected or unlicensed user or something like that.
So it would still show like the user's name on the data and everything like that. It would just kind of sit there in limbo in that site collection. So it doesn't move anywhere. It just stays there as an active site. Interesting. Okay. This next feature may not be that interesting to some of you, but may be more interesting depending upon what vertical your company's in. How many people are familiar with data loss prevention? About half? Okay.
The bane of my existence.
What was that?
The bane of my existence.
Yeah. So data loss prevention, this is another thing that's come a long way in Office 365 since it first came out. The idea with data loss prevention, or DLP, is it tries to identify if there's sensitive information stored in the data, and then it protects your company from sharing that data with the wrong people, is really the easiest way to explain it. So when it comes to OneDrive or SharePoint, let's say someone uploads a document and it contains a social security number or a tax ID number or some kind of PII. This SharePoint search crawls that document, looks into all the the text, and then it picks it up and says, oh, this has 15 social security numbers in it. That's a no-no. We're going to stop that file from being accessed by anybody other than that user, but until it gets fixed, until you take away those social security numbers. Or you could do something like, we're going to stop them from sharing it outside the company. So maybe we're fine with PII being in OneDrive, but we don't want people sharing that file externally with anybody outside the company. Yes?
So is that live, or is it just like a certain time of day it's going to try to go through everything? And
So-
how much overhead is that?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the gaps with this product right now, is that it's not immediate because the way the crawl works, usually in SharePoint Online or OneDrive, it's like between 10 and 15 minutes is the latest, depending upon like how the crawl schedule runs. So in theory, and I've tested this, you could upload a document with a bunch of stuff in it and then share it out right away before it gets picked up. But then when it gets crawled, then it kills it. You know what I mean? So you do have that 5 to 15 minute window, I would say.
The official SLA is 24 hours.
Okay.
So you have that.
Usually 15 to 20 minutes, like a small version.
Yeah. So I guess technically it could be that long, but even in testing this, like showing off demos to customers, it's usually under 10 minutes even that I'll upload a document, we'll go back in, boom, it'll have that. I'll show you that red bar, sorry, you can't get access.
That's an interesting question too, because when I first started with Office 365, DLP scope was only Exchange.
Yep.
And in the Exchange world, it's active
Mm-hmm.
because it can literally catch it in transition. So anytime it transitions through, it gets scanned.
Yeah.
But yeah, SharePoint's a different world.
Yep. Yes.
So when you say kill, what's track? What is that, what's kill?
So a few things will happen. You can block access. That's one option. Block access to this file. So somebody that previously had access then loses access once it picks up this policy tip. Because you got to think, this isn't just one time. It's not checking the file just the one time when you upload it. It's checking the file every time you modify it. Because I may upload, like in my demo, I have grandma's brownie recipes. I could go into that file and then dump a bunch of social security numbers into it. And then the next time, within 10 minutes, it'll crawl it. Right, so basically what it does is every time it checks it, it says, is there anything bad in here? And then if there is, do whatever your conditions are, your actions are. So it could be, stop sharing externally, could be send an email to an administrator. There's a few things that you can trigger it to do. That's how it would work.
But we decide what it does. It's not going to just automatically.
Yeah, you can configure it. Like there's some built-in things you could just select one that already exists. But most people want to tailor it a little bit.
Does it work also for PDF documents?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes, it does.
Yes. Yeah, I'm just thinking there's probably other file types that don't get indexed.
It does PDFs, it does zips.
But like a CAD or something.
And then you can set an alert if somebody has a boilerplate. So it says, I don't know, maybe. I've done some HIPAA DLP architecture.
Okay.
It was not fun, I don't recommend it.
Yeah. Sometimes you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
So just a quick walkthrough on this, and I'll show you this switch to demo at least for a minute. So this is available in the Security and Compliance Center. So if you're a global administrator and you log into 365, you have all the different admin centers. You have SharePoint, Exchange. Security and Compliance is just a different admin center. It's in that same area. And a lot of the features that we're going to talk about are located there. So DLP, you have the option to spread this across all OneDrive locations. So we're just focusing on OneDrive. I know it covers Exchange and SharePoint, but for tonight, you could do all OneDrives or just specific users. So it's up to you, like depending upon which role someone is in the organization. You may only need to apply it to people that touch PII, and the rest of them you don't have to worry about it. So you can actually specify which ones. And then you create the conditions. So you could say, I want to apply this to content that has sensitive information in it. Then that's the most common use case. And also content that's shared with internal or external users, things like that. There are, I think, there's 80 sensitive information types. So built in, there's going to be 80 of the most common across all the different countries, like U.S. Social Security numbers, U.S. tax ID numbers, and then for all the UK, so you're going to have all the countries already built in. And then it actually comes with templates. So if you say, like, we want to do a HIPAA DLP policy, there's already a template in there that pulls the right types of data and already sets it up. So you could just say, apply HIPAA policy to everybody's OneDrive. You don't really have to think too much about all these settings. It's just going to do what you expect it to do. And the end result looks like this. So in your OneDrive, you would see a little red icon over the document. You get a little message stating that this file doesn't comply with some administrative, compliance requirements, and then it tells you what rule you're breaking. So it'll say social security number, tax ID number, and then you have some options you can build in. You may want to send this off for approval, like a justification as to why you're trying to do this, and that gets routed to someone in the company that reviews it and says, oh yeah, this is right, let's approve it. Or it just blocks anybody else from accessing the file until you go in and delete all that data that's non-compliant, and then it takes up that policy tip away. Yes?
So we try to implement to Exchange Online as well, and then we always try to figure out how good is the HIPAA template on the OneDrive, on DLP. And there doesn't seem to be a way in the reporting to find out what are the true positives and what are the false positives. Do you have a way to figure that out?
I've read about it, but I don't have a clear-cut way to tell you. Like they have their own algorithm that looks to like how many characters away from this phrase is another phrase. So it's not just like looking at the raw text and saying, I see 3 numbers, then a dash, then 2 numbers, and a dash, then 4 numbers. It also looks contextually to what else is around there to see, is this a social security number, or is it just a series of numbers in a row that, that looks like it. Right. But I don't have a way to, there's no report that actually shows you how it does that.
Yeah, we try to find a report for it.
Yeah.
Usually we'll just tell you that this email being blocked or this file being blocked, but it doesn't really tell you exactly why this file being blocked. For example, there's 9-digit number in this file looks exactly like the social security number, therefore it's being blocked. We'll tell you that you'll only tell you who the owner of the file is, when it's being blocked, the name of the file path and stuff, but you still have to go check it and then see where is it false positive or it's real.
Yeah, that's really the same case here, is that you have to go into the document to review what's in it and then to make your own determination to say, yeah, I'm going to override this because it's, I don't know, like it's a SKU number, and it just has the right number of digits versus, oh, this is a risk as a security number.
And then you did a quick scan overnight and then you found 2,600 violations and try to figure out which one is false positive.
Yeah, that's hard. That's a lot of work. Unfortunately, there isn't a better way. You'd have to go through individually and look at what the content is.
No plan from Microsoft to improve the reporting part of it?
I don't know if it's.
They are constantly working on improving, and it's something they get asked a lot.
Yeah.
Because I've asked them a lot.
There's not much demo tonight, just because it's not very exciting to watch me run a PowerShell script. But the few things that I can demo, I mentioned to you that the my site secondary admin and all that stuff is located in the SharePoint Admin Center. So if you log in as a global administrator, you have the SharePoint Admin Center, and there's also the ability to delegate the administrative role for SharePoint to somebody else in your company now. So you could break it up and say, I don't want someone who's responsible for SharePoint and OneDrive touching my users and licensing. So you could just delegate them as a SharePoint service administrator, and they can do all the stuff we're talking about here without being able to touch Exchange or anything else. So when I say global admin, technically they could also be just a SharePoint service admin. So here, if we go to user profiles, so this is the SharePoint Admin Center. You have the site collections. This down here is the My Site host site collection, which controls all the OneDrives, which I'll talk about that in a minute. But the setting that we talked about earlier for the secondary admin is under user profiles, and there's an option to set up My Sites. So you can see here it's using the old lingo. That's why I kind of have to explain it's based on a SharePoint predecessor. But really these days, like OneDrive library, OneDrive site collection, My Site, all interchangeable. SkyDrive Pro, yeah. So if we scroll down, really the only two pieces that are the two pieces that we talked about that are of importance for this session is My Site cleanup with access delegation, and then My Site secondary admin. So pretty straightforward. You just check off the box and add either a group or a user to the My Site secondary admin and just a user to the My Site cleanup. And you go in and save those changes, and like I said, as long as you make those edits before you provision the OneDrives or the user self-provision, those will get applied to all the OneDrive.
Secondary owner thing new?
Secondary owner?
Yeah.
No, it's been there. So yeah, there's that piece, and then data loss prevention. So here I have a policy that I created for Social Security. So I didn't mention how to get here. So this is the same kind of thing you do here. As a global admin, you'd access the Security and Compliance Center right down there, and I already have it open, I think, over here. So when you land on the Security and Compliance Center, it gives you this dashboard, tells you all the new features as they keep coming out. The one that we're looking at right now is under threat management, and this is data loss prevention. So let that load back up. So I just created one for Social Security. Double click and take a look. So this one is it's applied to SharePoint Online and OneDrive, and I've done it to all accounts. So if you look at the rules, if you use one of the built-in templates, there's two different rules. There's a high and a low. So if it's a low threshold, that means I upload a document that contains maybe 5 Social Security numbers. Anything under 10 is going to be in that low threshold. We don't need to send out the red flags, and it's not a big deal. We should just look at the file, maybe notify the administrator, that something might be happening. But then there's another level of high. That's a high threat. Anything 10 or above, that's when we want to notify a whole bunch of people, block all access to the document. So you can take different steps based on the severity of what you think the threat is. So this, I just said, just if there's even one Social Security number, just because I'm doing a demo, then block the file. But here you could specify. There's also this thing of confidence level. So this is where you get into, you can actually kind of tweak it to say, how hard do we want to look for this? Like if you're getting a lot of false positives, you could rearrange this, but I don't exactly know how it works. They use their own algorithms, and they don't let us know. What?
They won't tell you that.
Yeah. So here we have Social Security number, check for one, and then this one I have block people from sending email or accessing the shared document, send a notification to the owner of the document, the person who shared the file, the owner of the OneDrive content, also notify an administrator. Then we also have use a policy tip. You can customize the policy tip as well. So just instead of using just the red thing that says you've added a security number, you could add your own custom language that explains what specific policy within your company that they're breaking. And then you also have the option to do like business justification rules. So someone needs to, maybe they really do need to share this file. Maybe it's healthcare, and hey, this is a real need. We're going to have to share this file externally. Great, we just have a business justification rule. It gets routed to someone for approval. They say, yep, it's good to go, and then it can be shared. Email incidents reports, depending upon the severity level, same kind of thing as when it happens, getting notified. And then you can choose a name and turn this rule on or off. So then I just went into my OneDrive and added this document, and see the policy tip there. This conflicts with the policy in your organization, contains one or more Social Security number, and then I can either resolve it or close it. So if I open the item to resolve it, delete the Social Security numbers, the next time it gets crawled, the policy tip goes away. Or you could, I don't want to do that. So you can see I made it very easy for it to pick it up. It wouldn't be that easy in real life, but so if I did resolve, I'm also the administrator, so I could override the policy or I could report an issue. So if I did override and then put something in there, oops, submit, I have to provide a justification. Okay, allow this to go. Recorded, policy has been resolved. I could then refresh it and it's going to go. So that's the gist of DLP.
Where's that justification go?
I think
Whoever you set up as a moderator.
Yeah, you specify it in the rule. So you have control over that in the rule itself to specify where it goes.
Things in there like set up to have it go to that person's manager, or to have it route specifically to some designated employee in the legal team within the company.
you should never apply that.
Okay. Bear with me. Okay. We are going to move to the next piece, which is the sync client. This usually takes up the bulk of my planning on a OneDrive project, is thinking through the sync client and how are we going to deploy it, how do we want people to use it, how are we going to set it up. So here I have really the comparison of the old sync client and the new sync client. The old sync client that's been around for a long time is again built on that SharePoint Groove technology. That sync client has been really bad. So OneDrive got a horrible rap because every time you try to sync, it would break, and then you'd have to resync everything, and you'd have multiple copies of the files. It was a mess. Plus, there was a lot of limitations. So we would say, yeah, we use OneDrive and use the sync client. You got unlimited storage, but it only allowed you to sync 20,000 files. So like, what good is that? And plus, there's no selective sync, right? So you can't pick what you want to sync. If you hit the sync button, it automatically downloads everything to your computer. That's just the way it was. So while it was a sync client that some customers used, it was not very good. Thankfully, they've taken the OneDrive consumer sync client and they've revamped it to support OneDrive for Business. That's really what they've done. And now the OneDrive sync client for the consumer, it's the same sync client. So you can actually have your consumer and your business OneDrive data syncing on your same machine with the same sync client. Some of the most notable differences would be the file size limit. So instead of a 2 gig file, now it's up to 10 gig. There's no limit on the number of files that you can sync. It supports selective sync, so you can pick and choose which folders that you want to bring down.
That selective sync is still only supported within OneDrive, correct? Not SharePoint libraries?
Well, so here's the thing. The sync client right now, the one that's released, is only supporting OneDrive for Business syncing. But the preview of the next, so the one on the right, the box on the right, the preview version of that sync client supports selective sync for SharePoint document libraries. It's still in preview. So if you have SharePoint and you're wondering how this all fits together, right now, like the official next-gen sync client, the one on the right, it doesn't support syncing a SharePoint library, so you'd have to have both sync clients side by side. The Groove one to sync SharePoint libraries and the next-gen sync to do the OneDrive for Business. But there's a preview version of the next-gen sync client that does both. It does SharePoint and it does OneDrive. That's the one that I'm running today. It's pretty good. It's still working out some kinks, but it's far better than the old one. So in the next, I would say, month or two, it's probably going to be officially released. I don't know exactly when, but it's been in preview for a while, so I'm assuming it's going to be soon. Then you can just get rid of the old one altogether and go exclusively to the next-gen sync client.
How can you tell which of these you have?
Thanks for that segue. So if you have Windows 10 or Office 2016, you already have the next-gen sync client on your machine. So now it kind of just ships with those. But if you have anything else from a previous operating system, previous, maybe Office 2013 Pro Plus or something, there's not a clear-cut answer as to which one you have. You have to figure it out. So the best way that I found to figure it out is to just look at the icon in your taskbar and what the word is that pops up. So if you hover over the blue icon and it says OneDrive for Business / up to date, that means you're on the old sync client. If you hover over the blue icon and it says OneDrive - your company name, that means you're on the next gen sync client. There's all these like weird nuances as to how they've branded this, but this is just in my mind, an easy way to tell which one you're on. If you've never had the option to select which folders that you wanted to sync, then you don't have the new one, because in order to use the next gen sync client, the very first step is it's going to ask you, like, what do you want to sync, and you pick and choose the folders. So that's just another way that you could tell. And if you're on the old one and you want to take advantage of the new one because it sounds a lot better, they have built in a transition process where it does a smooth transition. So it stops syncing all the data with the old Groove sync client. It then kicks off the next gen sync client, and then starts syncing again without having to download all the data again. So it's pretty seamless. You just kick off the thing, it shuts off the old one, starts the new one, and off you go. The reason why this is a challenge because it seems like customers would just say, yeah, we want to use the new sync client, off we go. It's a challenge because like older versions of Office include the old sync client, and some people might be using it. So you have to consider like, how are we going to do this takeover process? Maybe not everybody's on Windows 10 if you have like mixed operating systems, so maybe they don't have the next gen sync client on their machine already. Now you have to think about how do we get out to them. So really the two ways to deploy the sync client is either through System Center, if you use that in your company, or through group policy. It is available as a standalone download as well. So you could just go and download it yourself, but in an enterprise, obviously you want to push it out and make sure everybody has the right thing. There are some settings with group policy. So in this deck, I have a sample System Center package that you can mess with, but it's enough to be a starting point for the deployment. Has the files, and same with group policy. I have a group policy package if you wanted to use group policy. The settings in the sync client that you can configure with group policy would be things like shutting off the consumer OneDrive. So maybe you don't want them syncing personal data. You can block that. You can stop them from syncing to a different location. Maybe you want to specify like it goes in their C drive, this particular folder, everybody's data goes there. Maybe you're backing that up with another process or something. You have the ability to stop a user from changing that location. You can change the bandwidth percentage, like how much of the user's machine do we want to put towards uploading data. So if they just dump a whole bunch of stuff, we don't want it to now slow down their computer because or impact our bandwidth, because the day we go live, now everybody dumps their data into OneDrive and it kills the network bandwidth. So there's a handful of registry changes. It's really just group policy tweaks that you can make to do that. And then this last piece, nearly every customer that I've worked with has actually used this feature. It's SPO tenant sync client restriction. What does that mean? It means if someone logs on from home and they access their OneDrive, should they be able to synchronize that data to any old computer? Every customer, when I ask that question, they say no. We want them to synchronize data to a work computer. Usually they're okay with accessing OneDrive from home for like, I have a job, I got to do a couple emails, grab a document, but there shouldn't really be a reason to download 50 gigs of data to some other machine that now you have that data, you can do whatever you want with, especially if you haven't implemented anything like rights management or conditional access, or I wish I had more time to talk about those, but most customers don't have those things. So they just say, no, we don't want people synchronizing in bulk lots of data from home. So what this does is it stops the syncing if the computer is not domain joined. So if the machine is domain joined, you specify the domain, boom, it works. As soon as you log on with a non-domain joined machine, it doesn't allow that sync. So you can still access OneDrive from home or from wherever, but it doesn't allow the sync process. So you also have the same thing for Mac. You can specify if you want to allow. So this, if you enable this, it's going to turn off Mac altogether because there is no domain joined Mac. So you have to that's just a consideration. If you want Macs to be included and you use this, it's not going to be supported. You can also block file extensions. So usually this is like a PST. We don't really want to sync PST files because it messes them up. Like it does a weird like read-only state. So you can specify a list of file extensions that you don't want to sync as well. This next piece, we're almost there. Next piece here is pretty straightforward. There's only one slide. This is the modern experience versus the classic experience. SharePoint and OneDrive have both been revamped. The user interface is very different from what it's been in the past. They call this the modern UI. If you just go into OneDrive today and you've never used it before, it's going to have the modern look and feel. Now, if your users have never seen anything else, my recommendation would be just stick with the modern because it's better. It's faster. It's better on a mobile device. It's responsive. It includes a lot of new integrations, or will be soon. But you may have some customers or some employees that are used to kind of the older look and feel. That's SharePoint, the ribbon and kind of the older thing. That's the classic. So you can determine for your company if you want them to have the modern view or the classic view. You can set it across the whole tenant. And if the user decides they want to do the classic view instead, they can always just revert back. So for now, there's an option for the user to just click return to classic view, and they get kind of the old SharePoint-y feel. And then at some point, that's going to go away, and everybody's going to be on the modern UI. So Again, my recommendation is just stick with modern, but you do have that option for now to go back. And the last step before you launch to consider is external sharing. With external sharing, well, does anybody know what you can do with external sharing? Somebody else can talk.
Share
What can you do?
outside of your company.
Okay, share stuff with people outside of the company. What about inside of your company?
No.
Yeah. So you can share internally, you can share externally. With the external sharing, what are the options you have for external sharing? Anonymous and restricted. Correct. So what does that mean? I'll tell you. Anonymous sharing is just what it sounds like. You upload a document, you want to share it with anybody in the world. You get a link to that file, and that link can then be opened up by anybody without logging in. So I create a link to a specific file. I can put it on my website if I want. I can blast it wherever. Anybody that clicks the link gets in. That option is only good for individual files. Right? You can't say I'm going to share my whole OneDrive and make it anonymous. It's file by file. But if you want someone to log in, maybe most companies they do both. Like they want in some cases anonymous sharing. In other cases, we want people to authenticate and log in. You'd specify the user, who you want to share with. You can do that at the file level, the folder level, or the entire library level. So I want to share my whole OneDrive with someone externally, maybe a partner, or maybe I just want to do a subfolder, let somebody else in, vendor, whatever. There's also this new option to allow sharing with external parties that are in your network or in your domain, which just means like if your administrator sets like a B2B connection, so you can't specify like sharing with a new user, but maybe you're partners with another company, and your administrator says, we want you to be able to share with anybody on Microsoft.com. So at that point, you could share with someone that's, they've added into your domain, but you can't share with an external party at gmail.com. And of course, you could just turn this off altogether.
Where does that listing of administrator or organizational approved external companies live?
So there's two things at play. One is this option here at the tenant level is really the users have to exist already within your directory. They have to be added in by an administrator. And then there's a separate area where you can specify the domain, which just says we want to either, I think it's the next slide, but we either want to allow only this list of 5 domains or we want to block these 5 domains. That's a different area. So you would go in and specify either an allow list or a block list. You can do both, but it's either here's the domains we're comfortable with you sharing with.
That by company, you're not just adding people to the gal or anything like that, right?
With that approach, yes, it's just by company. With this approach, this one is new. There's very little documentation on this one, but they have to exist in your directory. So I don't know. It's a little different, yeah.
So the Azure team was adding some functionality on Azure AD that would let you do the B2B partnership. So it's completely separate from Office 365, but I think they somehow find a way to leverage that. But yeah, it's brand new.
Yeah, it happened to pop up once when I was literally writing the governance for SharePoint Online, and I noticed that 4th option appeared, and it wasn't in the screenshot that I took a week earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I literally just saw it pop up too.
Yeah.
It is referenced in one of the support articles somewhere, but not much out there on it. The other option too that just got added in recently is setting an expiration date. So if you create an anonymous link, you can specify as a company we only want those to last 15 days, 30 days, whatever. That's what most other products out there do. So other cloud collaboration products offer that same capability. So what you do is you'd set it at the tenant level, like that's the highest level. What kind of sharing do we want to allow? What's the most permissive sharing that we want anybody to do? Then it goes down a level to the site collection. So we say as a company, we're comfortable with anonymous sharing in some scenarios, and we also are comfortable with authenticated sharing. Then you go down to the site collection, and then you can decide within the SharePoint Admin Center, are we comfortable with OneDrive users sharing anonymously and doing all the stuff, or do we just want to do it on a specific SharePoint site collection? So you can actually specify by site collection what level of sharing you want to use. So the first thing is, okay, just decide at the highest level as a company, what are we going to support, what kind of sharing? Then which site collections do we want to allow sharing for? I mentioned when we looked at the SharePoint Admin Center, that last link at the bottom, the one with the check mark next to it, that's considered, that's called the My Site host. But if you turn on sharing for that site collection, it allows all of the OneDrive sites to share or not share. If you disable it at that site collection, they can't share. If you turn it on to that site collection, everybody can share. So it's all or nothing. You make one decision for all the OneDrive users. However, if you wanted to then peel it back for certain people and say, we want, as a general rule for our company, we want everybody to be able to share, but this team over here, because they deal with a certain type of data, we want to block them from sharing, either anonymously or authenticated sharing. You could then specify with that PowerShell command that I have by user, which is by site URL. Here's the URL for this user's OneDrive, block them, go right down the list. So if you need it, it's good. Most companies that I've worked with, they just turn it on for everybody, and then they set up some of these other controls to make sure they know who's sharing data and they can always report back on it and things like that. Okay, so at that point we would launch. Oh, I didn't mention this. Sorry, one more slide. Some other new settings you can do when someone creates a sharing link. So they go into a file, they hit share. You can specify what the default behavior is. Do you want it to create an anonymous link? Do you want it to be an internal or an external link? Here's where you specify the domain as well. So you have the option to do either an allow list or a block list. So maybe you're comfortable with sharing, but only if it's with the 5 partners or vendors that you guys work with. So you could set up a process where somebody could request the domain to get added. Somebody in IT goes in and says, "Yep, we approve you to share with this particular company." There's some other options too around notifications, which are really good. So if someone shares a document that you own, like let's say you have a OneDrive, you share it with somebody in your company, they share it with somebody else, you get notified when that process happens. So it's not like a surprise that now all these people have access to your data.
You can also expire those links now. That was just newly added this past year.
Yes. Expiration is definitely key, especially since most other products have it. So now we're finally caught up to what other companies have done. All right, let's just close it out here. So at this point, you've done all the prep work, you've planned it out, then you're ready to really go live. So imagine this slide here being all the work for data migration, doing waves of 15 or 20 users, migrating their data, doing training, adoption activities, all the things that go into a successful deployment. I'm just kind of skipping over all that, and now we're live. Okay, we've done all the prep work, all that stuff happened. It's been great so far. Now, what do we do that we're live? So some of the things that I asked at the beginning, like, do you know if people are, what are they doing with your data? Where does it live? Who's sharing it? Who are they sharing it with? Those are things we do have access to now. Recently, they've added kind of a unified area to look at all the activities that happen in Office 365, and they've given us an interface to do it. So in the past, you had to use an API to get at the data. Now it's very easy to do for any administrator to look and report on these activities. So these are called end user activity reports. You can look through really anything in SharePoint that somebody might want to do, SharePoint, OneDrive, along with all the other products, Exchange activities, administrative activities. It might be something like, show me a report of any time someone became a global administrator. Show me any time that someone accessed a file. It could be, literally anything. And what's cool about this is once you set up a report that you like, you then turn it into an alert. So you don't have to keep going back and retroactively trying to figure out what happened. You can just say, show me anytime someone deletes a file from this location and notify me by email. At that point, you don't have to come back here to do it. You set it up. It's going to notify you appropriately. Of course, you could just come here and periodically review what's going on, who's sharing files externally, who are they sharing them with. And what's great about this is that this hasn't been supported in Office 365. The ability to see who's viewed a document, that's always been lacking with SharePoint and OneDrive, because that level of auditing was blocked up until this capability came about. So I had people like migrating from SharePoint on-prem to SharePoint Online, and they were used to having the ability to do reports that show you who views documents. So I share a document with a partner. It's like a mergers and acquisitions. I want to know if they read it. Sorry, it's not supported in SharePoint Online. Now with this new way of getting at that data, this portal allows you to see everything. Whether someone downloads a file, opens it, deletes it, modifies it, it's all there. And there's the new feature. I'm only going to do one slide about it because most people don't have a license for it. This is the advanced alerts, and this is part of an E5 license. So I imagine most of you are on an E3, maybe an E1 or some other plan, but E3 is kind of the standard. This feature is part of an E5, which is a newer license. It's also available as part of a standalone addition to an E3. But advanced alerts allow you to check for anomalies. So if someone logs into OneDrive from a country that no one's ever logged into your tenant before, that's going to put up a red flag. If someone tries to delete a whole bunch of documents in bulk within a short amount of time, they just start going and deleting a bunch of stuff, that's going to trigger an alert. So there's built-in policies and things that are there to protect you. It's kind of going one level beyond what Office 365 already includes. So pretty cool stuff, but again, most people don't have a license for it yet, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time. All right. Only two things left. This piece, content search. Has anybody ever done anything with e-discovery? Okay. So not a big need. These last two really I would say they deal with e-discovery. Content search is a compliance feature. If you want to see all the data related to a particular user or a particular topic across everything in Office 365, this is where you would go. So it's what they call like a unified search tool that searches through Skype for Business conversations, documents in group, OneDrive documents, SharePoint sites, everything. All of your data, except for Teams. Teams is not included yet, but everything else, you go here, you do a search for a keyword, you do a search for a user, it's going to all get returned back. What's great about this, the reason why I like to include this is with SharePoint in the past, doing any kind of e-discovery, the tool that you had was called e-discovery center, and it was very limited. You could only do like 100 users at a time. So for a big company, it just didn't work. It fell flat. With this tool, you can do all your users at once. So there's no limits on how many users you can search through. You don't have to actually be an administrator of their OneDrive. The Compliance Center has its own set of permissions, so you can just say, somebody in our team is a compliance person, they go and do a search, they get access to all the data as they need it, so on and so forth. And then from there, once they do a search, they can preview the data, like show me anytime this phrase M400 exists. It gives you a preview of where it shows up in the file. You can then export that data. You can do advanced e-discovery and lots of other things. So e-discovery case management, I'm not going to spend much time because it doesn't really apply to many people in here. But think of that same searching, looking through all the data that's in 365 and seeing what's out there, and then putting it on hold, locking it. So let's say you get sued, you have to send out the data for review. At that point, it does an in-place hold. So it says like lock all their OneDrive data, lock their Exchange data, put it on hold. It can't be deleted. It can't be modified. The user doesn't even know that it's on hold. It's kind of happening behind the scenes. And basically the way that works is it just takes a copy and moves it to a hidden library called the preservation hold library in their OneDrive. So it kind of takes a snapshot, and then if the user tries to like clean their tracks and go delete a bunch of files related to this litigation, it just secretly moves them to another library on the OneDrive. So it automatically is going to take the copies the right way. They don't even know that it's happening, but it just helps you make sure that you're not going to lose any data related to that litigation. We're not going to spend too much time about this. Last slide I have is around advanced e-discovery, which again is part of that higher license. And the idea with the advanced e-discovery is that it gives your lawyers a tool that kind of says how much of your data do you want to look through? If we look through, I actually just went through a project with a customer, a pharmaceutical company that rolled this out. And for them, it's like they get sued many times throughout the year, and it's a really big, expensive process. And they have an outside party do the e-discovery review, and they pay by the item. So it's like $1 per email that they have to review, or $1 per document. So the idea with advanced e-discovery it has machine learning. So let's say there's 100,000 items or 1 million items that get pulled into this e-discovery case. You can then decide like how much of the data do we want to send out for review? And you kind of train the system. You look through an email and say, yep, I'm tagging this one as relevant, this one's not relevant. You do like a little bit of training the system, and then it looks through the data of everything else that's in your 1 million items, and it tells you within like a 95% or whatever relevancy you want to put into there, how sure are you going to be that you get all the data that needs to be pulled into that case. So it saves them a ton of money, because instead of sending everything and letting those other lawyers try to figure out what's good and what's bad, it uses like predictive analytics and machine learning to do the work for you and save money. So that's the idea there. Kind of speeding up at the end, but anything related to OneDrive that we didn't talk about that's burning on your mind? Yes.
So we currently block OneDrive for personal use,
Mhm.
and wondering how do you have an environment where you can allow for business but block personal stuff? I don't know if it's the URL the same or some of the functions. For example, we're blocking live.com so people can't even get their Hotmail because that's what we want. But eventually, when we open up Office 365, we need to separate business from personal.
Yeah.
How do you go about doing that?
So the first thing you said with the URLs, it's definitely different. Like OneDrive.live.whatever is the consumer, and with OneDrive for Business, it's going to be, the tenant name .sharepoint.com/personal/ the user's name. So it's a completely different naming conventions. You could just do like, if it contains this, the OneDrive, it shouldn't even have OneDrive as of right now. You could just block that URL altogether. And then you could, with the sync client, with the group policy thing, you could say, don't allow anybody to connect to their consumer OneDrive to sync that data down. So you can remove that option altogether. I think that's all you have to do, because then they can't get in the browser, they can't sync to it. It's pretty isolated.
Different policies, live.com, they won't affect
Okay. I think we've seen some issues with, just in our testing, not with OneDrive, but at least with SharePoint, where if we're going through a proxy that blocks live, where it's blocking some of the functions we need to do. And I was just wondering if OneDrive is going to see
Unless you learn online, or certain things that are in the environment.
Yeah, they use some funky URLs for their authentications.
They do. Do you want to go?
Yeah, is it possible for a OneDrive for business user to create an external link for an external party to share a document with that, with the link Dropbox type of a deal?
Yeah, so it's not that easy. So no, the short answer is there's not that same option where I just like create a drop, I can put a document into. I've had some customers that can like share a folder with an authenticated, so they have to authenticate. So if they're willing to authenticate in, which means they have to sign in with an account that either has a Microsoft account associated, or if they're already on 365, they log in to a folder and then they can upload to that folder all they want. But it's not as easy as just like, give me a link and send it. There's some steps in the process, so that's kind of clunky.
If we had external sharing off, that wouldn't work at all?
Correct. Yep. Yes.
The biggest problem we have is the file path limit when people try to migrate from Box and everything. Is there any tools or workarounds? Otherwise, it's a manual process.
So ShareGate, does it support Box? It supports Google Drive. I don't know about Box. I think it does. Does it? No?
No.
I'm not sure. So ShareGate is a tool that would help you identify those problems, but it doesn't help you fix the problem. There's another tool called Files to Go, which is a migration tool that I don't know if it truncates it or it zips it if the file's too long or something, but it does something to handle the long path. But then you're doing it on behalf of the user, right? Like if you expect the user to do the migration themselves, then there's no reporting. Like they drag and drop, the file's too long. There's no report that gets spit out, so it's really hard for them to manage that. That's why every company I've ever worked with wants to do more of a managed migration, where they say, okay, we want to know what kind of problems we're going to run into. We don't want to send, these people down a thing that's going to take a week for them to deal with stupid issues like file length. So yeah, something like ShareGate, you'd run the report against your entire file server to say which users are going to have problems, and then just kind of work on it like that, a case-by-case basis. And you may not want to have a tool automatically do that. That's the other thing we run into. Like if you just start changing file names and cutting, truncating stuff, that could totally mess up, what someone's expecting.
Like we're trying to migrate from Google from Docs, we know the errors, and they tell us we can shorten it to this, but now it's a manual process. I was hoping there was a tool that said, okay, these paths shorten to this path. And just...
Oh, I gotcha. I don't know.
So essentially, if you take that report of all your files, let's say you put that into an Excel spreadsheet, you have one column just calculate the length of that path.
No, we've already done that.
And then in the third column, you can write like a batch script
Yeah.
that says rename the file to this.
But how do I rename it in Docs? It's not on a file server. It's an easier problem. It's going from one cloud service to another. Docs seems to use virtual paths. And so now I need something that either in between says shorten this as it's going, or something to go right into Box and shorten it if it doesn't need to do it ourselves.
So Box has two migration vendors. I think SkySync is one of them. And there's one other tool. And they actually support a lot of this in-flight changes. I'm not sure about this specific case, but we're worth checking that out.
I think BitTitan does Box migrations too. I don't know if you guys use that.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
And there's also, of course, an API for Box that you could use if you wanted to write scripts.
Build your own tool. Any other questions or anything related to OneDrive for Business at all?
One small question. You mentioned the end user activity report.
Mm-hmm.
Is that on the SharePoint side or is that on the Office 365 side?
Sorry, yeah. Let me just show you that real quick because that's really powerful. Literally 1 minute here. So do I have it here? It's advanced alerts. So if we go into the admin center and go to security and compliance. Yeah, it's under security and compliance admin. It's not under the SharePoint admin. And then you do alerts. We can do manage alerts, or it's under audit log search. If you just want to do a search first, you would go to audit log search, and then you could take that and create it into an alert. And here for the activities, as I mentioned, you can literally do like open to file all the way through who shared a document, who shared a site, who's syncing documents to a computer, who stopped syncing, site admin, exchange, a bunch of pretty much anything that you would want to track. It's available. So yeah, yes.
We have a first online question from Gene.
Nice.
Congratulations.
Sweet.
Is there a surefire way to map the OneDrive folder as a network location, or would the end user have to use the client to access the files?
Repeat the question.
Can we map a OneDrive folder as a network location, or do they have to use the sync, the client to access the files?
Yeah.
Network clutter.
Yeah.
If it's a SharePoint library, then yeah,
it is.
Provided with the OneDrive.
You can. So the answer is technically you can, but it's a bad practice. There's authentication happening when you make that connection, and the SAML token expires after like a couple hours. So you're going to have to keep logging into 365 to make that map drive connection stay. It basically goes away. It still shows there, but it doesn't let you into it. So you have to go back to get the new SAML token, and then you log back in. Not to mention, it's depending upon which operating system you're on. It's only if you're on Windows 7 and you're in this thing, then it's not going to work. There's other services that have to run on your computer. Web client services have to be running. Total pain to manage. So Sync Client is a much better solution.
Cool.
Yeah. Yes.
So I don't know if you feel like there's an issue with this, but right now we have a location on the file server for some that people's My Documents are mapped to. Mm-hmm. Now, could you do that with OneDrive, or is there an issue with the timing of authentication and needing My Documents to be
I'm not sure. So
right now it's kind of invisible to people that don't even really realize it, that their My Documents is going to a file server.
Yes.
It's not on their local machine. can you do that same sort of in the background of your stuff? And I'm not talking about having a file server syncing to OneDrive. It's legit going straight to OneDrive because you're my document.
Yeah.
So like
you
Roman
can
redirect the My Documents to a OneDrive location.
So you can't.
You could do that, yeah. You can do that
also set up
redirect.
a symbolic link.
Okay.
You can also set up a symbolic link. I just did that with my documents, my pictures, and videos. It's a PowerShell command that fakes out Windows and redirects your local folder to whatever folder you tell it to.
Okay.
So you can go straight to your OneDrive as well. Yeah.
Yeah, if you do the redirect option too, like this is more of a migration thing, but if you did the redirect from your documents to the OneDrive path, it actually does move the documents too.
Yep.
So it'll do the migration just by doing the remapping.
You can do all of that by GPO. So
Yeah, you could do that. Yeah. But I've had some smaller companies that just do these couple steps and it will migrate the documents.
We can have it set to the OneDrive location.
The big risk with that though, I just did it a couple weeks ago because I switched laptops and I was using Git in my documents. And so synchronizing Git onto OneDrive back on the machine. And so I had to undo everything I did, get Git out of it, get my Visual Studio Projects folder out of my documents, and then resync it because all the paths were super deep, all the file types were invalid. There's a lot of stuff there that I wasn't expecting to do on my computer, which was really exciting.
But you kind of get that if you're moving your My Documents anywhere, right? It's not.
Yeah, but yeah, as a developer, I like bringing down like just Microsoft SharePoint framework is 30 folders deep, and on Windows that's fine, but OneDrive can't handle it that deep, and it blew up. It was awesome. Yeah, so just.
Have a live connection into OneDrive if you're not syncing it, so if
No.
you lose internet?
No, it captures it local, and then it syncs in the background. So I've actually used that a lot as a migration tool
Mhm.
So it becomes
as
an
well.
offline file.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's a sync.
You're
It's
not
a,
using the same client.
Yeah.
It's becoming an
it's an
offline.
offline file. Yeah. So if you didn't kill the sync, then you have a copy of all your files locally, right? You mean like it actually creates them locally. So if you go on a plane with no internet connection, you have all your files locally. Then you make the internet connection again, and it syncs the changes back to OneDrive.
Like they're redirecting my documents through GPO, not through the sync client. So then they must be designating it to be an offline file. There's no sync client involved.
On the redirect.
No, we're using the GPO to redirect the My Documents to the same folder that the OneDrive agent does the synchronization to.
Oh, what I was saying was that we don't want that though. Because in terms of, if we did straight to OneDrive, you could then get rid of your file server.
They want to go straight to the.
Yeah, because I can see issues, if you have a connection issue, all of a sudden they have no My Documents.
But with the OneDrive, the clients are all
Okay,
files.
that's what I mean.
Right. As long as they sync the documents, they would have them locally.
Yeah, they would still have them local.
On their local machine,
On their local
not on the
machine.
file. Oh, okay, I see
On
what
their
you're
local
saying.
machine.
Okay.
And then the sync agent will sync those. So what you're doing is just within the profile stack, there's a folder for documents. And that's where your My Documents. When you install a OneDrive, it creates a new one called OneDrive. And your folders exist under there by default, if you do the default.
You want to switch to yours?
But I think
They
one
go
of
to there.
the-
You just redirect it to
Share my
the
screen.
documents.
Oh, you can do that too.
OneDrive sync, then you still have local copies, and when it has an internet connection, it synchronizes changes.
Okay, but I think that goes against what our policy, because we also don't want things sitting locally on that workstation either.
Yeah,
So
if you don't have things locally, then
Then you shouldn't use the same client.
Yes, that's the answer.
That's not even what I
Thank you.
Yeah, look at
Is there a path
network
that
path
you
option.
straight at
Yeah.
OneDrive on log on? Not.
okay. Yeah.
The way that we want to do it, we can't do
It'd be
it.
problematic. I'm sure you're ready to do that, but.
Yeah, no, I can see a lot of issues out of it.
All right.
No? Anything else? No?
Cool. Anybody have any other questions? Awesome. All right.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Oliver. That was awesome. Cool. Some upcoming events. Nothing specific, but this is our community slide. So there are SharePoint user groups in Boston, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Connecticut, There's a Boston Azure meetup. There's a New England Link meetup, and SPS events, SharePoint Saturday events. If you haven't been to a SharePoint Saturday, I highly recommend it. We don't. The next one hasn't been announced yet, so don't get too excited just yet. But it is a full day of free sessions and events, usually hosted at a Microsoft space. I could see next year being hosted here because this space is beautiful and spacious. With world-class speakers coming in, great topics. They're getting more and more Office 365 stuff because that's where SharePoint's going. So highly recommend that. And we will let you know when the Boston one and the Hampshire one and the Connecticut one come up so we can attend. Our next session is January 19th. I am this close to having a speaker. I just need to get the speaker's information. So I think we have somebody. We do have a sponsor, Actance, and locations TBD. How many of you are willing to attend a session in Boston or Cambridge? Okay. Keep us north of Boston up here. Yeah. You guys are still? Yeah. All right. Yeah, same here. All right. We may alternate locations because there are a lot of people not here that are usually here that go to the Boston one, so we may alternate every month or something like that. We are streaming the sessions now. We had a successful night tonight. We had somebody actually sign on and ask a question through it. So if we are alternating locations, you can definitely still watch us remotely. Or I'll come up here, stream it here while you guys run it down in Boston. You can do that. Any community announcements? Anybody hiring, looking for work? Know of any other events you want to share in the space? Yes.
There's another event. There's a IT Pros user group that is meeting in CComp on next Wednesday, and I will actually be giving a presentation there on Skype for Business and PBX Cloud and PSTN.
Cool. Where's CComp?
So it's down south.
Sounds far.
Next to East Providence.
Okay. Yeah, anything south of Boston I don't know about. Yeah. All right. Cool. Anybody else? Cool. As members of our group, you get a couple of discounts over at O'Reilly and MindSharp. They have the codes there. And now we're down to the raffle. So we forgot raffle tickets. So we can either do trivia questions. All right, let's do trivia questions. Oliver, come on up. We're going to have you ask some questions, maybe about what you just presented, anything Office 365 related, and the first correct answer gets to grab one of these lovely raffle items. They are all email based, so you will just give us your email and you'll get it in your email tomorrow.
All right.
Go ahead. What's your first one?
First question. Which application in Office 365 does not include the compliance and security features we talked about today?
No idea.
Planner?
Planner?
No? Good guess. I did mention it briefly.
Teams.
Who said it?
Teams.
There you go.
There you go. That's awesome. Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I guess so. Those are good questions.
What did we talk about?
Invited him into a room, Brian. You could write down your email address next to the one you want. Sure.
Ready for the next one?
Yep, fire away.
All right. So, when an employee quits, how long is their data retained by default?
30 days.
I don't know. Everybody had their hands up. Fight for it. 2 minutes. How much data can you assign to a user before you have to ask Microsoft for it? You guys are too
Raise
good.
your hands.
We're going to be banned back here.
All right. I thought we skipped that part.
All right, this is another hard one. If you're trying to assign a secondary administrator using PowerShell, you should limit it to how many users per day?
200.
No?
250.
No?
2,500.
2,500. Nice.
Nice. That's a good answer.
Very good.
2 stabs at that. You got done. 3 stabs. You're done.
You want the $25 gift card or the drink?
You don't want to take the drink.
Yeah, I'm almost like the pizza tonight.
Are we,
So what
we need one more? Or are we good? One more?
One more.
What is the name of the sync client that came before the next-gen sync client? Guru. Yeah. Close. No, you got it.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
Close.
You're stuck with
Came in
$25.
close second.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Thank you.
So we would like to thank all of our previous sponsors. Without our sponsors, events like these couldn't be possible. We'd like to thank Microsoft for the space, as well as our sponsors picking up the food tab each time around. So if anyone is interested in sponsoring, please let us know, and your logo will also appear on the slide forever. We typically go out for pay your own way drinks after these events. So today we'll be going to Not Your Average Joe's right across the street. So if you want to go and talk more 365, I'll be there. I'm sure a lot of others will be as well.